Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Editor for the Tennessean, and we have the pleasure of having our guest, David Fox, candidate for mayor of Nashville, and our editorial board members here, President and Publisher Laura Hollingsworth, News Director Maria DeVarine, and Metro columnist Frank Daniels III. We're going to have a discussion today with Mr. Fox about his campaign and go a little bit in depth into some of the things that are on your mind and some of the things that we've heard throughout the campaign. And maybe to start, if we can talk a little bit about your focus on fiscal responsibility. Probably sure. You, of all the candidates that I've seen, have mentioned that from the earliest get-go, from the time that you started it, you basically decided to run on a fiscal conservative platform. For those who don't know you as well yet, talk a little bit about that and why is that the foundation of your campaign?
Well, sure, and thanks for having me today. I appreciate it's a good public service to have all of my colleagues in here as well. So thanks for hosting me. You're right, I have been focused on fiscal conservatism from the beginning, and that was one of the reasons I got into the race. You know, to date, we've knocked on about 43,000 doors. I've probably had maybe 1,000 or so people call me on my speed date thing we've done on the cell phones. So people call me just all day, every day. And so from that, I think I get a pretty good sense of what people are interested in or what they don't want. And what's become very clear is, you know, they don't want higher taxes. They don't want more debt. You know, what they do want, they want the government to work. They want to fix the roads, want to have some more sidewalks. They want to make sure they can kind of walk around in their neighborhoods and feel safe about it. So these are sort of all the things that kind of fits why I'm in the race. It's all about protecting kind of our Nashville way of life. And so if I believe what they're telling me, and I do believe it because I hear it over and over and over again, it's kind of my job as a candidate to see if we can kind of kick some ass right here in the campaign. And so far, I think we're getting it done.
Nashville Way is something that you've used throughout your campaign and also in your commercial. In one of your commercials, you have people helping each other.
Right.
Have we lost our Nashville Way? Or tell us a little bit about how you would maintain, sustain, bring it back.
Well, thanks for asking that, because I think that's what it's all about, is when people come to Nashville, people come here on business or come here for vacations, you know, they'll always comment to me, and I suppose you guys get the same comments. Man, people in Nashville sure are nice. They'll talk about sitting down in a restaurant and the people next to them start speaking with them. And when our family goes out in the greenways, people wave and stop and talk to each other. And so to me, that's our calling card. It's not just because we have a great music industry here or a great healthcare industry. It's what attracts people and holds them here is the friendliness and civility of our city, which astonishes me that in my lifetime, in like 50 years of being in Nashville, people from all over the world, from vastly different cultures, could select to live their lives here in Nashville. But it reinforces our culture of kindness and friendliness and being just good neighbors. But what I think where we are right now is we're at a point where that's being jeopardized. And that, to me, is the most important issue going on, really, and is being jeopardized by the growth that has been so awesome for Nashville in my lifetime, is now pushing us to where we're sort of outstripping the infrastructure supports we have for a city. You know, and our advantage is, we've seen this before. You know, we have the advantage that Atlanta maybe didn't have 16, 18 years ago. We've watched them. When I was coming out of college in 1983, everybody was going to Atlanta because it was the cool place, good nightlife, tons of jobs, a very prosperous place. And they didn't get out in front of it. And the growth they experienced ended up just slamming their quality of life. It's still a lot of economic opportunity in Atlanta. I mean, you can make the same argument about Los Angeles 30 years ago. Some would say Austin sort of reached our spot 4 or 5 years ago, and Austin's a pretty similar city. And so what I think is at risk here is we've got to move urgently to shore up the basics. You know, the transit, which I already mentioned, the sewer and the water, the quality of our public education. These are the things that can diminish sort of the heart and soul of our city, the character of our city. I mean, if a commute that used to take 20 minutes takes an hour, then you show up for work not quite so cheery as you used to be. If you know your child is trapped in an unsuccessful school, that will certainly diminish, you know, your attitude. If your business is closed for 4 or 5 days because the water system broke. So these are the basics that we have to focus on, and this is what we hear all the time. I mean, again, knocking doors, you get a pretty clear understanding of where people are, and they've kind of sort of have an appetite full of exciting downtown projects. You know, they say, can we just kind of cool our jets a little bit? Can we let our economy grow and kind of tap back to the neighborhoods? And so that's the focus.
So David, would it summarize your approach and your vision going in that versus what's happened over the last several years for all the good of it, the downtown, the economic development, a lot of business growth, a lot of that you would return to the basics, that would be your focus, and you would focus on those things versus a vision for even more growth and how that occurs, or how do you balance that?
See, I don't think, a mayor is not going to control whether we grow or not. We are going to grow, and it doesn't matter who's elected mayor in my view. We have so much momentum, there's so much opportunity, our quality of life is so high, we are going to grow. So that's not the choice, and frankly, growth has been so good, I'm not talking about building a moat and keeping anybody out, because I can see how much better we are by welcoming people. Being a diverse city makes us a much better city. So that's really, in my view, really not the issue. The issue is, can we incorporate this growth in a way that doesn't slam our quality of life? And to do that, it is back to basics. It's, well, we have built up downtown. We have some exciting things going on that I enjoy, and my kids will enjoy the baseball stadium. I've got 3 Little League guys, so we'll be down there a lot. But it is back to basics time. It's shoring up our infrastructure, making sure that a city can support such an inrush of population. And we've seen this before. Many cities fail. They act too slowly. They sort of react when they're in crisis. And this is our advantage. We can be forward thinking. We see this coming. And if we have leadership that understands it, but does it in a way that's fiscally conservative, and I say that because we have spent a lot of money now. We have a lot more debt on our books than we used to have. We do have $3 billion of unfunded liabilities that we have to take seriously. There's not a lot of incentive for mayors to look at these unfunded liabilities, because that's kind of a long-range problem, and it's a politically dicey thing to address. But that's a thing that creates franchise risk for us. We have a lot of wonderful things here, and it would be a shame to kind of blow it on an unforced error by not taking care of problems that we see right in front of us.
Well, let's stick with some sports stuff for a second,
Yeah.
since you did the unforced error piece.
Okay.
So sometime perhaps in the next 8 years, the mayor may be faced with what to do with the Titans. Mm-hmm. We're certainly every year addressing what to do with the Predators in Bridgestone Arena. As a fiscal conservative, tell me what your thought process is of how we manage those 2 large investments that have very much been part of the fabric of Nashville over the last 25 years.
Right, and I'm glad we did a referendum on that, on the Titans. That ended up being a great decision for our city, because the city seemed kind of split. This is going back to the Bredesen days.
Right.
And it ultimately wound up with a referendum, and we had a clear expression of support for it. And that really catalyzed our community to come behind it. So I think we were well served by that. And so I still believe there's mass broad support for having, supporting professional athletics or professional sports. I remember though, like the first week I was in the race, somebody came up to me and said, you're going to have to build a new Titan stadium. I thought, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? I'm thinking, yes, I am fiscally conservative. I think, man, I'm not sure we want to do that. But as we've gotten into it, I think there's actually one thing I think about is, there are some issues in the ownership family of the Titans itself. And lately they've said that they plan to retain ownership. We'll see. They perhaps don't retain ownership. And so typically what happens when the ownership changes with an NFL team, the first conversation is, what do you do to improve or rebuild the stadium? And that's going to be an interesting conversation. I don't want to say in advance exactly where I am, because that doesn't make a lot of sense if you want to negotiate to tell the other side exactly what your negotiating position is. But I think we have been well served by having sports here. I think Bredesen was very forward thinking and was smart and pushed that through. I'm glad the people supported it. And I want to make sure we retain it. But got to say, we won't pay any price. Price does matter in this, just like in our own households. When we buy a car, we don't go in it with the attitude, well, I'm going to spend any price for my car. We say, well, here's my budget. And so that's what we'll do. We'll go in with our budget. We'll have a dollar amount in mind. We won't be talking about publicly about what we can do that sort of makes sense for us to spend. And we'll negotiate, and I think we can secure their continued presence here. But it'll be an interesting conversation.
And then what about the Predators, the subsidies that continue to flow to make Bridgestone Arena and the Predators an integral part of the Lower Broadway experience?
Right, I remember there was a great Christmas card I received either this past year or the year before from, I think, McNeely, Piggott and Fox. And it was a picture from recently and a picture from 20 years ago when all you had was just the building of the Gaylord or the Entertainment Center, Bridgestone Arena, and everything was just vacant or industrial. And so it really made clear, hammered home, how things like that can be huge drivers of economic revitalization. And so we've been well served by it, and I think our relationship with them is fine. It works well for us, and I don't see any reason to alter it. They're having tremendous success, so are we. We're benefiting, so I'd like to continue that. We have I think the Predators are pretty unbelievable, frankly, in how much they give to our community. They're involved in so many things. I used to be on the board of the American Parkinson's Disease Association here, of the local association. You know, and they had some of their senior staffers, one of whom was affected by Parkinson's, just did a tremendous amount of just civic work. So can't say enough good about the Predators.
So then within that that framework, the Titans have been good. Everybody voted for that, or the community voted for that. The Bridgestone Arena has helped spur that lower Broadway development. The other investments in downtown that you express concern about in terms of the debt load they've created, talk to me how you visualize the comparison to that, all these investments that have happened in the last 5-6 years, going forward in terms of what kinds of investments that would have the same kind of long-term benefit economically.
Sure, and I'm glad you asked that because I want to be very clear. So I think these projects are very exciting, and I don't think we're not in imminent risk of collapse, financial collapse here. But we should be aware of a few things. About 18 months ago, our debt was downgraded to still a very high level. So again, it's not screaming panic. We're not there. But what concerns me is I can detect among other candidates and some other folks, there's sort of a culture of debt and spending that alarms me. There's a belief that the only way to have a strong economy is we keep on adding debt to the municipal books. And I feel close to the opposite. I think the one way you jeopardize our economy is by adding too much debt to our books. We can shoulder what we have right now. We have some great things going on. My issue is going forward, let's be more cautious. The city sort of moves in cycles. We had Mayor Bredesen who did some really big projects that have worked out nicely. And Mayor Purcell came in, was fiscally conservative, didn't do the big projects, kept us in really good shape. Mayor Dean comes in, has kind of done a mix, but in the last term has spent more capital expenditures. And so I think it's just time now to tack back. So we can shoulder what we have, but I tell you, it bothers me. I finally at the debate I think you guys co-sponsored at Belmont, there were so many conversations about spending money on this and spending money on that, and all of which sounded great. They sound like really good programs. But again, you have to look at the city's budget like you look at your family budget. And families, you don't buy everything you want. You buy what you need. Sometimes you defer some things. And so finally I just said, I sort of have the impression that my colleagues think we're the all-you-can-eat salad bar and some rich uncle's going to come here and pick up the tab. And that's what bugs me. That's what really concerns me, because that's how we get in trouble. So the money we spend going forward should be, first of all, a less amount of money on our capital budget. That we have some neighborhoods that need some really tactical assistance. There's some things we'd like. I spent a lot of time in Madison. I'm growing up here. Madison's always been a very solid middle-class community. But in the last 6 or 8 years, it's had a tough time. There's a combination of things that happened that have caused it economically to get very wobbly, and it's starting to infect, the economic problems are starting to diminish the quality of life there, and we need to move urgently on that. I think Antioch, we're seeing sort of bottomed out. They've made the turn. They've got a real sense of unity in Antioch that's really awesome to see. That is frankly absent in Madison. There are a lot of people with ideas in Madison, but they're not on the same page. And that's a role that a mayor can play. The mayor can say, let's get together, for the good of everybody. Let's come up with a common vision, find out what the city and the mayor's office can do to be useful. Maybe we create enterprise zones, give some, a several-year tax break on property taxes or whatever to get businesses to locate in this area. So those are the type of things I think we need to be tacking back to rather than building more buildings. I think we're kind of done on the building front.
Well, in that vein, so the city has made a lot of investments in the Antioch area.
Right.
Not to the same dollar amount, but percentage-wise, Antioch has gotten, larger investments than other parts of the community.
It has.
Do you think that's a model that for you as you look at Madison, at Bellevue, at other parts of the county?
Not necessarily a model, but I think it's been good. For two reasons. Antioch has been historically underserved to begin with, and then their population growth has been by far bigger than any place else in the city, so they have been just badly underserved by all services. I remember when I was on the school board, in terms of trying to project where do we need additional schools built, like in 2006, 2007, the school system badly underestimated the population growth down there. And a lot of it was just misunderstanding how new Americans live. They live much more densely than people who've been here for a few generations. And they just missed the fact that you'd have this population increase. And so the school system, as you know, has been catching up building schools down there. I think the building of the park and the library and the community center and participating in the Ford Ice Center have been critical. I think that has been a good plan for Antioch. That's not necessarily a plan for anywhere else, though. I'm not really a one-size-fits-all person on much of anything, and I think we ought to keep in mind what we've done in Antioch to see if it applies, but I don't know that it's that terribly applicable to other areas.
Can you talk a little bit about the plan that you have or what you might consider as funding mechanisms to improve some of the key areas that you touched on, transit, sewer, and water? How are you proposing to pay for additional infrastructure needs that may or may not already be in the budget?
Right. The biggest challenge for us on that is transit. From knocking on doors, we always ask people, what's your number one concern? And the number one concern is still public education, but a close number two is transit. So in my view, kind of distilling this information, I think our biggest problem remains the quality of public education. Our most urgent issue is this transit issue, because again, we've seen other cities reach this point. Originally, going back 8 or 10 months ago, I was saying, well, let's make sure we have a regional vision, and let's work, collaboratively with all the mayors around here, get a vision, and then work in, and then figure out how Nashville fits into it. And then I attended the Mayor's Caucus meeting, and I saw that they were not as far along as I had imagined they were. They've been meeting for a number of years with a big focus on regional transportation, and they do have a vision for it. But candidly, coming up with a vision is not the hard part. The hard part is how are you going to pay for this stuff? And they have not made progress there. They've not really made any progress there. And so after hearing that and seeing that, which was unexpected, I sort of backtracked and said, well, we should not hold hostage addressing Nashville's transportation issues, waiting for all the mayors to get on the same page. Having said that, I think we have to be very focused on having a regional conversation. We need to work hard to get regional collaboration, but again, we can't just sit here and wait to get 40 people on the same page when that's probably not going to happen. So as a result of that, I started exploring other options, and one that I've talked about at a lot of the forums is to see if there's a way to have the private sector get involved on the commuter piece. That's a model that happens very regularly in Europe, happens less often in the United States. Here what it would involve is working with a railroad company that has freight lines in areas where we'd love to have commuter rail, and see if we could partner with them in some regard to use their right-of-way or their existing line for commuter rail. Now they've made it very clear for compelling business reasons that we're not going to be able to use their freight line, and they've done it in 5 other places. And the issue is, just so you know, is that the way the federal regulations work is the passenger line kind of trumps the freight service, but the CSX, the companies make their money on freight, and so they don't want to put themselves in that position again. And they're very concerned about Radnor Yards, which is a huge switching station. This is a strategically important spot for them in the southeast. And so what I would like to do is press hard to say, well, a couple possibilities. Maybe it's in our taxpayers' economic interest to go to them and say, well, would you like to have a state-of-the-art switching station built somewhere further out in the county, which would, I think, give them a little more flexibility, make them a little less sensitive to some of these issues. And then also to to press hard about use of their right-of-way. I think there's conversation to be had there. And the advantage of that is I think we could probably induce the private sector to build and own it. My guess is we as a municipality and probably municipalities in this area would need to lease it back, so we would assume the liability. So I'm not going to say we're finding, this isn't money falling on our head here. We would be shouldering a liability, but if we do enough work, I think we can guesstimate fairly well what the user fees would be. I think people would pay a lot of money coming from these various areas if they know they could have a predictable ride in from, say, Williamson County to downtown Nashville, use their Wi-Fi. That's what happens in other cities, and it's no big deal. You do it as a matter of course. And so the first thing I want to do is press this as hard as possible. I'm not a big eminent domain fan to begin with. And if you think, okay, well, if we want to have a commuter transportation system in Middle Tennessee, knowing that's fully developed, you have to take thousands of people's property. You have to condemn it. And I was here when I-440 was being built. I think it was 18 years late in finishing over these issues. And so, again, if there's a sliver of hope, we can partner with the existing right-of-way with the CSX. I want to press that hard. So that's sort of where I start. And again, the advantage of that is that debt conceivably could be in the private sector rather than added to the public sector. So that's how I approach it. But not all of our infrastructure needs can be met like that. Our water, sewer, there are some cities that engage the private sector, but in my view, from what I've seen, it's not really as robust as this. So I think that's something you write checks for. It's, you fund it, you have to float bonds to finance it. I don't think there's really an alternative there. And then we have to sequence it. Maybe we can't do everything we want in the next 3 years, but let's be, responsible in how we, do this spending, so that our economy is at least growing, so we don't get ourselves mismatched between our, how vibrant our economy is and how much debt we shoulder, and that's the important relationship. So.
Sounds to me like you're more interested in opportunities where we have revenue bonds associated with the investment than general obligation bonds. Is that sort of going to be the way you think about community investment in your term if you're elected?
It could be. A lot of it depends on the condition of the bond markets themselves. And it's a pretty mercurial market. When I was on the school board, we went for over 2 years without a capital budget because the bond markets were such in turmoil. So it's hard to say in advance. Would you go with a general obligation bond or a bond tied specifically to the revenue of the project? Just have to see what the market will bear, really. So, but my preference is to have as much shouldered by the private sector as possible. That's my preference. And so every opportunity we have, that's what I'll be looking to do. Like when I was on the school board, when we were, I was finishing up my term, we were still coming out of the recession, we were about $10 million short on our budget. We had some choices. We could have laid off a bunch of teachers, a bunch of things we could do, but several of us were able to sponsor and have approved the hiring of a private firm to do our janitorial and custodial that saved us $6.5 to $7 million that year. So every year since then, several $1 million has been able to go back into the classroom that otherwise would not have been. That wasn't one of the fun decisions to make. That in my view, it was an important moment for the school board. The school board oftentimes has a tough time distinguishing between do we serve the adults or do we serve the children who are in the schools, and that was a very unpleasant decision to make. But it was an example both of sort of how I think in terms of let's find a private market solution that might save us some money, and an example of how when the school board sets its mind to it, it can focus on what it needs to focus on, which is the welfare of kids.
You were the first to come out and say that the school board should not hire a superintendent until after the election.
Right.
Talk about that for a second.
Sure. Dr. Register made clear he was going to resign in September. And then November, December, Mayor Dean suggested, maybe the school board should wait for the new mayor. And I didn't say anything at that time because my view, the sooner we can hire an A+ director, the better off we'll be. And they had plenty of time just knowing how the cycle of hiring is. But for reasons I don't really understand, the process just went really, really slowly. And they seemed like they wasted a lot of time. And so May rolled around. And for those of us who've sort of been in this before, there's a cycle of when you have the most robust set of candidates. and it's not right before school starts. You know, most people try to give their employer notice. They don't tell them, you know, a month before school starts, by the way, I'm taking the job in Nashville. So as a result, they kept on talking about hiring somebody in June, and that just scared me. I said, you know, I wanted to take the pressure off them is why I wrote it. And I said, you know, I would encourage you not to have an artificial deadline for yourself, because you're forcing yourself to select when the pool is going to be at its shallowest, the pool of candidates. And I said, and if you wait, you know, the next mayor can be helpful. You know, I've told all of them that, you know, I understand the relationship between a mayor and a school board, and even if I had my preferred candidate for superintendent, it would do no good for me to try to force it down their throats, because the only way you can have a successful superintendent is if he or she has the support of the vast majority of school board members. So that wouldn't work. So I've told them, I'll do anything you want. If you want me to bring people into the pool, I'll do that. If you identify somebody to help recruit, I'll do that. And so I just reached the point where I felt like we would be better served by having them delay it, both because of the hiring time, and also might as well engage the mayor and make sure you have a great relationship between the mayor and the school board, because I found that is so much more important than I ever realized before I was on the school board. That's a critical relationship, and having the mayor in place would give us a better chance of securing that good relationship.
They've announced their final candidate pool. Do you
Right.
think it reflects the concerns that you had?
I continue to wish, I would continue to urge them to understand we need to have an A+ superintendent. Don't have any artificial timelines in mind. Just because, you know, some candidates have been put forward doesn't mean you need to select them. You know, I've hired many people before, and sometimes you can do it quickly, sometimes it takes a long time. And this is arguably about the most important decision that Nashville's going to make. We have the mayor's race going on, but I'd say arguably who we select as superintendent may be the most important decision that gets made in Nashville. And so I would just say, take your time, vet these candidates. We'll see if anybody's appropriate, but don't put that sort of pressure on yourself. You know, Chris Henson has been interim before. I remember, I remember when I was on the school board, and it was clear that we were going to have to buy ourselves some time because there were a lot of things going on. The state was about to take over the school system, and there was some conversation about Chris Henson. So I talked with him. I said, Chris, we might want you to be, you know, the board will have to discuss it, but we might want you to be interim superintendent. I said, just, it'll be 6 or 8 weeks. Don't worry about it. Just come in and try to improve morale. That's just because morale was terrible at that point. Just improve morale. 6 or 8 weeks, we'll get somebody in here. He said, sure, David, I'll do whatever you want. Well, a year later, he was still there, and one of the funniest meetings I was ever in. I guess funny is the word. Funny in retrospect. It was Chris, Connie Smith with the state, who was very involved in our district, and myself. And this is about a week after Chris had been named interim superintendent. And Chris was kind of following my direction of, look, let's just keep things moving along and make sure our employees understand we really do appreciate all they're doing, and kind of get morale so the next person comes in. And Connie came in and sat down and said, okay, Chris, you're gonna have to rebuild curriculum. And just gave him about, and he was just like wide-eyed, said, Connie, I'm a finance guy. I'm not an academic person. But it worked out, and the state was involved, and Chris ended up doing a great job. And so I've not, you know, I'm a due diligence guy, and I've not had time to do due diligence on these 4 candidates. I hope there's an A+ person there, but find if there is or not. And if there isn't, let's just keep on going. Bill Attia, who runs the search firm, is very capable. We worked with him. He did a stand-up job for us, had a complex situation. So if the school board decides that our right candidate's not in this group, Attia will keep working on it, and he'll find some good candidates.
Nashville Next was passed just a few weeks ago by the Planning Commission, and that will be a big part of the administration of your elected mayor. Obviously, the council will be taking up numerous amendments. When we spoke at the debate, all the candidates essentially said in theory that they would support it. How do you feel about Nashville Next today, and what are the concerns you have about implementing it over the next decade or so?
Right, so, you know, it has been adopted, and I think the process has been a good one. I mean, I'm trying to think of any more, short of a referendum, I can't think of any more inclusive process we've had on anything. And so I applaud that, and I think it sort of fits the notion of what some of the challenges we're dealing with, whether it's affordable housing, you know, or the issue of, and I hear this again when I'm on people's doorsteps, they'll look at the quarter-acre next door where you used to have a home, you now have 3 tall and skinnies. So it starts addressing those issues in a pretty thoughtful way. And again, I apologize. You know, we've printed out a hard copy, which is a little over 1,000 pages, and I've not made it through it. I've checked here and there a few parts of it. This is the type of thing that, being kind of a wonky sort of guy, I would in normal times have devoured every page of it. The campaign has kind of kept me from going through it as detailed as I would like. You know, one thing in this campaign that's been really interesting to learn is just how powerful planning and zoning is. I always knew it. My background's not in real estate development. My background's in small business and finance, so I haven't had personal contact that much with planning and zoning. But it's been impressive to see just how powerful these organizations are. When I was in the magazine business, when Rick Bernhardt was hired, you know, 13, 14 years ago, I had a staffer who had a better understanding than I did of these planning and zoning issues, and did some research on Rick, and saw he was bringing a whole new mentality, a whole new approach to our built environment. And so we did a cover story with Rick on the cover, says the new czar of downtown, told how he was going to reshape, and it was really prescient. It was exactly right. You know, Rick has been very focused on density, and I think in many areas that has well served us, because if we want mass transit to work, you know, if we're going to assimilate people who are coming here from all over the country, that we're going to have areas of high density. But I will say I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I think we've sort of gone beyond density in appropriate areas to kind of density everywhere is a good thing. And I hear that multiple times a day. I mean, I hear that as much as anything. People just in neighborhoods don't feel like that's always the appropriate thing. They live on an acre. They like living in places where you have a lot of space. They pay for it. They pay property taxes to support it. And there's a real level of discomfort that I find all over, and it's not really so much in the core, it's everywhere outside of the core. There's a real discomfort that there's a belief we're sort of doing a one-size-fits-all approach on zoning, that whenever somebody wants more density, they get more density, and which kind of ties into another. So I share that discomfort. And one thing I've found, and I hear it a lot, if we're looking at these density issues, and it comes back to how metro government runs, which I've found to be a little more siloed than I would have guessed, is there needs to be a connection between density and infrastructure. Because like when you look at Green Hills, you know, and their density is being added, but infrastructure is not improving to support it. And that isn't going to work. I mean, I used to work in the Green Hills area, and it's tough. We have other areas just like that. And so we need to have more coordination, in my view, between planning, you know, zoning, you know, and all the various infrastructure things to make sure that we sort of move along together. And so that's another little angst I have about this density issue, is I feel like density has gotten out ahead of our ability to support it, and that's what people are upset about.
You know, the Nashville Next Plan affordable housing was deemed the #1 issue for the community, and there's been a lot of talk about inclusionary zoning, talk about increasing the Barnes Fund.
Right.
What are your specific ideas or thoughts about, you know, how do you address affordable housing, or is it something we just have to allow the market?
I mean, it was the city, became cosmopolitan, great restaurants, good jobs. We could ride our bikes anywhere we wanted to. And the first hint we had that we were not handling our growth well was in a couple-year period, housing prices went up so fast, all the working, but with the cops, the police, they could no longer live in the county. And he said Los Angeles never really adjusted well. They couldn't get their act together quickly enough. And so, again, I take that as a cautionary tale to us about the overall growth issues we face, that this is a leading indicator of some of the larger problems we're going to deal with. So I take it very seriously. But when I think of affordable housing, I think of kind of housing affordability. In other words, their wherewithal, their ability to pay for housing more so than building affordable housing. Like, again, where people call me, and this comes up a lot, or when I'm on people's doorsteps, you know, they don't say, you know, I want the government to build 10,000 units. I can live in a affordable housing project over here. That's no one says that, but they are saying, I'll talk to senior citizens, and they'll talk about, man, the property assessments are going up so fast. I'm going to get forced out of my home. They're retired, or they're not retired, and they're just, you know, lower middle income, and they're seeing the real risk of having home price inflation force them out of their house. And so I think there are things we can do on that. We can, you know, we already have a program locally for senior citizens. We could expand that, and I think we should. I think we should expand it for people based on income levels, which would require some state legislation to make it happen. But I don't think we want to be in a city where folks are forced out of their house because home price inflation. So that's something that I would like for us to do. I think I'm in favor of voluntary incentives. Some want a kind of a coercive approach. I'm not a big coercion guy. I like to provide carrots rather than beating people over the head with sticks. And so I'd be in favor of providing some density bonuses for developers, for the private sector to build some places. Say if something's zoned for 20 units, upscale it, say go up to 30 units, but you set X number aside to either sell or rent at below market prices. So that's my approach. And I think the Barnes Fund is worthwhile. We don't really have a real dedicated funding source now. We have the rental housing issue. That's not going to provide any real money for a while. So I think that is something we need to spend some money out of the operating budget. There's not really been like I said, there's no recurring source of revenue that's been designated anybody's found, and I haven't identified yet one either. So, but I am in favor of using money of our operating budget and putting some more money in there. And I thought it was smart to use $5 million from the sale of the old convention center and putting that in there because, as you know, that money gets leveraged to the banks, probably 4 to 1, maybe 5 to 1. So that $5 million will support $35 million of, affordable housing, workforce housing. So those are the kind of voluntary ways that I would like to see us move forward on affordable housing.
What kind of team do you envision putting together if you get elected?
Yeah, I think it's very important, and I've started working on that. I kind of gave myself a few months not to focus on it, but knowing there's not much time between the runoff and when you take office, I want to start quickly. I had a great meeting last week with somebody who knows as much about the city and the state government as anybody does, and that's all we talked about, is how do you get off to a quick start. I've had a lot of meetings to understand exactly what the skill set we need for a finance director. I have a few people in mind. I've not asked anyone yet to do that. There are a few small changes in the mayor's office that I'd like to make. I'd like to have somebody who's a director of exports for us. But right now, exports are handled mostly through the state and the Chamber of Commerce. But kind of other cities our size, I think, have some success that really pays for itself by having the mayor's office take ownership. And I think it's an appropriate role for the mayor's office to represent private industry and try to open up markets. And and exports for us is not just having a manufactured good we sell to Europe. It's the music that's created here to generate more revenue. It's the students who come here from overseas to go to Trevecca or Fisk or go to Vanderbilt. That's an export dollar. And so the more we get to that, more of that we get, it just really, that's about the most powerful dollars we can get. So that's kind of one pretty finite thing. I want to keep the mayor's office budget neutral. The changes I have in mind, which are fairly specific, would kind of keep it neutral. I don't want to be adding staff. But I will say there is an area where I think we are going to have to add a small number of staff. It's back to this issue of I've been surprised by how siloed our government agencies are. And they know it, and they don't hide it. And I will say, like when I got to the school system in 2006, I found a system that was not just siloed, but at war. Man, these groups hated each other, within the school system. It was really eye-opening. I'd never seen that before. And Jesse's done a good job of creating a really solid organization that somebody now can come in and do great things with. In metro government, I don't see that sort of antagonism, but what I do see is there's not nearly the coordination that they want. And they say, when you have good personal rapport, when the head of these departments have good personal rapport, then they're coordinated. But when you don't have it, it's kind of hit or miss. And so that's not good enough. In the private sector, you would have probably 3 or 4 positions created, executive vice presidents, where you'd blend together these departments who work together all the time, and they would be sitting on top. And that's something that I'm pretty seriously focused on right now. I've been having a lot of meetings to see, because I don't like creating bureaucracy. I like to decentralize. I see in this situation, though, we're not getting the communication we need, and it's creating inefficiencies. And they say, and the department heads will say that we're doing stuff we didn't know were going on over here. So that's some of my thoughts.
So follow on to that, as you're putting together a team, you have to be thinking about what you're good at and
Right.
what your weaknesses are.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of your weaknesses that you're looking to fill here.
Sure. Well, I see the mayor's job as that of an active chairman, not a hands-on CEO. And I say that because the portfolio of responsibilities is too broad. You don't want your mayor owning every issue because the scope is too big and you just can't handle it. You can't be a good leader if you have that sort of hands-on ownership. Now, having said that, you have ownership, you have responsibility, you are accountable if things don't work well. So I see the relationship not unlike the year or so I served as school board chairman when we had an interim CEO and the state was very involved. So I became more of an operating chairman. So my job, the way I envision it, is to set our goals, to hire the right people. I'm going to have a very aggressive chief of staff, and that person's job is to ride herd on everybody and to let me know at the earliest moment when something is not trending well. Because one thing I've learned from business is problems usually don't cure themselves. And if you don't want to have to deal with a crisis, you deal with a problem when it's small. And so I want to make sure that I'm informed of problems as they emerge. So that's the vision. And I think that's really the only way you can do it. I mean, there's 53 departments here. You know, some have their own boards, some are appointed by the mayor. I think the only way to be successful is the mayor to set the goals, hold everybody accountable. I'm a finance guy, I know balance sheets, I know income statements. One thing that Bredesen was great at, he was great at looking at the budget for every agency, and he knew which line items to look at. Some are more important than others. So you can kind of monitor how an agency is doing if you know how to read the financial statement. And that's something I do bring to bear. I've been doing this for 25 or 30 years, and so that's what I'll be doing. It's critical to have a great finance director, and that's very important. And again, the finance director's job doesn't have to know every line item, because the budget people here are really good. I don't know if y'all have had a chance to meet them, but the budget people within Metro are really capable, and they present a very easy to understand budget. You can get as much detail as you want. So that's not the job of the finance director. The finance director is just to keep everything moving, to relay what the goals are. So you know, I feel having, especially my experience on the school board, I think left me with that's 40% of our budget. And it was arguably the worst performing agency in Metro government. So I felt like the experience we had kind of pulling our board together and having it become a pretty functional group. You know, the elected school board, you know, what we're seeing in the last few weeks, which has been distressing to many people who watch the school board, this is pretty much normal. I mean, I've been watching the school board for decades, and it's these periods of when things are working well, that's the aberration. I hate to say it, because we pay a price for that. We pay a big price for it. And so in our time when we were on the board and I was chairman, we as a board came together. We had a common vision. We made some tough decisions, as I mentioned earlier. We focused, every decision was based on, well, how does this serve the long-run interests of children we're serving? And we created an environment that was attractive to pull somebody in. And that's critical, and that's another reason when we talk about when to hire the superintendent. You know, these are the bosses. The elected school board members are the bosses of the superintendent. And if you're a high-performing superintendent and you see the disarray, the dissension, the sniping that's been going on, you know, are you going to want to work for them? And so I've had the experience, again, of pretty much leading 40% of our budget and learned the difference, frankly, between being successful in the private sector and being successful in the public sector. It's quite different, and you have to be much more inclusive.
So how much of that ability to bring that board together was based on the group deciding to do that, and how much of it was the crisis that you faced?
There are a lot of things contributed to it. Part of it was the crisis, because on the first year or so, I was outvoted 1-8, 2-7 and everything, because I was looking at the metrics I could see, and I said, boy, our performance is awful. We can't be tweaking things, and that was just not the attitude of others. So when the state came in and said, your school system is the second worst in the state, and the only thing probably performing less effectively is your school board itself, that got people's attention, and it really helped. So it's important to have somebody do that. The mayor played an important role. I mean, that's one thing that distresses me as much as anything in these mayoral conversations, you hear a lot of the candidates will just say, you can essentially, they're all but saying the schools are not on my org chart. Well, that's terrible, because again, our school board tends not to, it has trouble being effective for long periods of time. And what I saw with Mayor Dean is he was able to be a very helpful collaborator where he could, and sometimes a critical friend when necessary. And by doing that, the school board had a much bigger appetite for reform. And what scares me to death is if we have a mayor who doesn't get that, who really has in his or her mind, well, it's not on my org chart, I promise you, the last 5 or 6 years of turning this thing around, it's going to hit the bottom, it's going to reverse immediately. And that's what scares me as much as anything in these mayoral debates. It's, they just don't quite understand how you have to both understand the nature of the problem and be willing to spend huge, unlimited political capital. Somebody asked me just the other day, said, well, what will you do? I said, I will do everything. There's nothing I will not do in terms of political capital as mayor to help our schools get better fast. And my deal is...
speaking about that political capital, one area where the mayor has had some failures is in trying to get the community together to pass things like the AMP, the jail move, the new police headquarters, and the flood protection system. How might you have approached that differently, and what would you bring in, what strengths do you bring in to be able to successfully get those things passed under your administration?
David, we all learn by mistakes. And when I was on the school board, I made my own share of mistakes. And part of it, again, was not day one understanding. You have to be really inclusive. You got to be transparent. You got to build a vision before you move forward. And I figured it out, and things worked out nicely. We had a lot of success, and turning over the school system, I think, in far better shape than it was in 6 or 7 years ago. And I think that's the challenge. I think when Mayor Dean, who I think has been a very successful mayor, by the way, especially in education, I think whenever he's not been able to execute his agenda, he has not done that, and we know that now. I think we've been so much public conversation that I think we all understand that in the public sector for the mayor, you have to act that way. You have to engage people, but there's a better reason for doing it. The fun of being the CEO of any organization, whether it's a 10-person like private business or the head of a 650,000 person city, is to understand, well, there's only so much capacity in the CEO's office. We know only so much. We may have areas of expertise. The thrill of being a CEO is saying, well, I've got all these people out here who have tremendously creative ideas. And if I'm smart, and if I figure out a way to tap them and encourage them to share these creative ideas, we go from being an okay organization to an awesome organization. And so not only should the mayor be inclusive because you want to execute your agenda, you're inclusive because that's where the good ideas are. That's where the capacity is. Just think how all these ideas could be improved if we had much more public conversation about it. We won't get to unanimity on these things, but we can build consensus, and we can get far better ideas when we talk about this thing very publicly. So that's the other reason. That's really the fun, in my view, of being the head of any organization. I've been the head of a bunch of different things, and again, it's to have your 50-point plan on transit and try to force it through Metro Council, that's not great. I mean, that's not what I want to do. I want to come in and I want to help the community prioritize what do we need to take on, and then let's harness all of our resources. There's so much intellect and brain power in Nashville. It's so fun. I mean, it's just, to me, I'm just so excited. I'm just excited. Think about it. I had leadership over the school system, which is a big organization, but this is 650,000 people. And for me, I just get excited about what we could do if we have a very aggressive effort to engage people and get ideas when we address some of these issues.
Yeah, the charter amendments, there are 3 charter amendments on the ballot this year to extend term limits, one to extend term limits and lower the size of the council from 40 to 27, and then the workforce one, the 40% of the workforce needs to be from Davidson County.
Sure.
How would you vote on those 3?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. How would you vote rather than what are you campaigning for? Because I'm not really being terribly public on any of them, but I will tell you how I'll vote. I think when the idea of term limits came along, however many years ago it was, I thought it sounded like a pretty good idea. Well, it hadn't worked. And I think we need to be big enough human beings to say, well, when you make mistakes, and I think that was a mistake. I think, I like balance of power. Even though I'm running for mayor, I would feel better if the Metro Council were more robust, were more powerful than it is. Now, we've seen lately, frankly, it's doing its job. It rose up. It was obviously got concerned, got a lot of, and so it shows what the potential of that body is. My view is that 2 terms is just not quite enough. It takes too long for them to get up to speed, and it's created kind of an unseemly imbalance of power and authority between the mayor's office and the Metro Council. I'd like to see the Metro Council a little bit stronger than it is, so I think it probably would be well served by having an additional term they could do. On the issue of reducing the size of the body, I don't think it's a big deal one way or the other. My guess is they might be marginally more successful if they were smaller. The difference between 40 and 27 is probably not going to be a lot, though, in their effectiveness. I will probably vote in favor of reducing the size, but it's not a big deal for me. I don't think it's going to have a huge result, positive or negative. You know, when I was on the school board, I was responsible for the equivalent of 5 Metro Council districts with tons of constituent services. And so I think I was able to execute that fine, and so I'm not terribly concerned that, you know, Metro Council members could not do good constituent services for another few thousand people. I think they can. So I'll vote in favor of it again, but that's not a hill I'm going to die on. There's a lot more important things than that. And the final issue is the requirement to have essentially 40% of workers on Metro contracts live within the county. I think that's one of many proposals that get kicked around that sound like they're well-intended, and I understand it as mayor. I have a huge incentive to make sure as much government work as possible gets done by Metro workers, because it's in my interest to have our economy strong, blowing and going. I want that. And so I already have the incentive to want us to do business with people who hire locally. But that isn't going to work. I mean, we have such a labor shortage right now. I mean, that's one thing in these forums. We'd always get asked, what are you going to do to create more jobs? I said, man, we've created a ton of jobs. Our problem is a workforce development problem. We don't have people who are trained to take these perfectly good jobs. And so this would be an unusually bad time. I mean, look, it's well intended. I don't begrudge anybody doing it, and I emotionally see why you want to have as many people as possible in Davidson County on these projects. But we're going to create a big problem for ourselves. I mean, we have a huge labor shortage. Historically, we've always tapped expertise outside the county forever. I've talked to builders, so I'll vote no on that.
But we have 5 minutes left of our debate. Any other questions from the editorial board?
So one of the, you talked about Carl Dean as being a good, you thought he's done a good job as mayor. One of the things that he does that I'm curious about your approach, he is very visible in the community.
Yes.
I mean, he is everywhere.
Right.
It seems like. Is that the kind of role you see for yourself? I mean, we've had this conversation before where, you know, I question how comfortable you are in all of those kinds of situations, and the campaign probably has illuminated your thinking there. What is? So tell me about that kind of personal style.
Right. One of the best meetings I've had was, I don't know, 8 months ago. I asked to meet with the mayor. I said, look, I'm not going to ask for your support. I'm not going to go into policy. I just want to discuss, how do you be a candidate and be a mayor and be a good father, a good parent? Because he had young kids and I've got young kids. I said, well, how does this work? And what he said is kind of sort of all bets off during the campaign. So your spouse gets crushed. I mean, it's a 24/7 job. But he said, you know, once I was elected, anytime I needed to be at school or at home at 5 or 5:15, I could do it. And so that was very comforting to me. That's what I expected to be the case. And so that was a big deal for me. I mean, I've got, you know, Carrington and I have a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. And as much as I love Nashville, I love it tremendously, it's not something I wanted to wreck my family over. So I've come away, that gave me a lot more confidence that we could do this. And Carrington's doing just a crazy good job. I mean, how she's handling all her work and does a lot of the social media for our campaign, and now she's doing Little League stuff that I used to be doing. So, so I think I will be engaged. You know, I used to be a journalist like you guys. My office was, you know, about 50 feet that way, as you know. And if you're a journalist because you're curious. And while I'm not the most gregarious guy in the world, I'm not a big backslapper, I love learning things. Like when I knock on doors, what I focus on is making sure I talk for no more than 25% of the time. Again, being a reporter. If you're a good reporter, you're not talking all the time, you're just listening. And so I want to be as busy as I can just to learn. And so, Mayor Dean has set a high bar for showing up at events. I tell you, he's also good at getting to events and slipping out of events and going on to another event. So I don't know if I can pull that off, but he's done a good job on that.
Any final words for our viewers?
Sure. I just want to say, being in the race is a lot of fun, and what's been interesting to watch is in the campaign. My campaign manager said, "Let's just sit back and watch. There's a good chance that a lot of the candidates are going to shoot all their bullets before the war starts." And he was right. In April and May, most of the candidates spent between $500,000 and $1 million. And my supporters were killing me. They said, "Fox, are you running a real campaign? Where's your TV ads?" And so my guy said, "Nope, this is Bunker Hill. We're going to wait to see the whites of their eyes." And so we didn't spend a penny until June, didn't spend any real money until mid-June, and they've run out of money. And so now, from here on out, we're spending $155,000 this week on TV ads. We'll spend $160,000. We're outspending people 4 to 1 now, and it's not because we had a ton more money. It's just we were fiscally conservative in how we went about it. We didn't spend money 2 months ago when most people didn't care. Well, they care now, and so what's going on in the polls? You saw Megan's poll, but before we did any TV, we were like at 6%. That's probably where we were. 2 days and 3 days into our first TV ad, we're up to 11%. We think we're probably 13 or 14% now, and next week we think we're probably going to be in second place. So the dynamics here are changing rapidly. We're working our plan. One thing that's been interesting is Bill Freeman. He has a ton of money and spending it, which is his prerogative to do. But in the last 8 weeks, he's spent close to, more than $1 million, and has gone down in the polls. So he has 100% name ID, and 80% of the people are choosing someone other than him. So there's a kind of a thought out there that he's inevitable. Well, our view is different. We think he is really vulnerable right now. We think if I were Freeman, I would be pretty concerned, both having topped out and risk of imploding, because his brand, when I knock on doors, people tell me, like Linda Rebevic, she's the technology person. Megan Barry, she's the kind of progressive liberal. For me, it's Nashville way of life and fiscal conservatism. With Freeman, it's, well, he's spending so much money, he's going to win. So his brand is inevitability. Well, what's going on now, people are seeing that's not true. He's flatlined, having spent tons of money, and the first time he has a backup in his poll results, it's going to be like, our guess, there's a good chance it's going to be like a balloon popping. Once that inevitability is gone, his campaign is at real risk. Our guess is that there are 2 slots open, and I'll be facing somebody other than Freeman in the runoff. I know that's sort of contrarian thinking, but that's based on a lot of data and a lot of experience. So it's been a lot of fun, and we're having a blast. And right now we're just going up, we're doing a hockey stick on the polls right now. So I feel great about it. And thank y'all. Y'all been great to have me and all the other candidates a good public service.
Well, thank you very much. And to our viewers, we appreciate you. Come back to Tennessean.com to look at the replay of other mayoral candidates. Mr. Fox's video will be up later today. Thank you so much.